Friends, welcome into another edition of Deportes Nation, the soccer podcast. It's always a pleasure and an honor for you to join us. I'm Alex Parra. Beside me, you see him on screen, the co-host. I'm his co-host. He's my co-host. I guess we host together. We welcome in Victor Araiza. Victor, good day, good evening, good morning, depending on when and how people are watching or listening to us. How are you, Victor?
I'm great, Alex. Happy to be here, speaking again about the beautiful game on our little space here on Deportes Nation. Obviously, a big hello for all our listeners. It's been a little while, but glad to be talking here again ahead of a lot of games here in 2024, and obviously looking forward to that World Cup in 2026.
Right around the corner, and I'm going to reminisce about my World Cups, 90, 94, 86. Physically being present there and what that meant to me, certainly as a youngster. You probably weren't even born, Victor, but that's another story for another day. A lot of activity, not only the World Cup, El Plato Fuerte, the main course in 2026, but this year, a lot of competitions. We'll talk about the start of the NWSL season, the MLS season. We have Copa America coming. We have Nations League. We have CONCACAF. Is it still called Champions League, Victor?
The Champions Cup now.
Champions Cup. So a lot. Our sport continues to grow and thrive, it seems, more and more every year.
That's right. The W Gold Cup as well. So the women's are going to have their own championship here in a couple of weeks, or actually just right next week, I guess. So it's all right here. The calendar is full, and there's going to be no lack of things to talk about.
Absolutely. Well, why don't we start with our first topic, which is 2026, looking ahead to the FIFA World Cup coming to Canada, United States, and Mexico. Again, co-sharing it, which is another interesting proposition. But let's talk about Houston. Houston gets the schedule. Houston at NRG, Victor, will be hosting 7 matches. I don't see anything negative about any of this.
No, we heard 5 games. That was the expectation, and to get 2 knockout games, I think having that expectation of 5 and getting 7. I mean, I think it feels great. I don't think anybody's complaining. 7 big games. I know the comparison to Super Bowls has been thrown out there, and hopefully it is that type of impact. Hopefully, the other thing I've heard is, will the teams, the local teams, the Dynamo, the Dash, of course, take advantage of that. And of course, in all the markets in the United States, but of course, because we live in Houston, we focus a little bit on these. I hope so. Because it would be a big missed opportunity if it doesn't. But I think organically, it just has to.
Well, let's talk about that. I have been in my lifetime in presenting not only this sport but others, skeptical at times of the so-called economic impact, Victor, that some of these events have. Yes, for some, and the way it's been presented, it's 7 Super Bowls. In Houston, that would be over on roughly less than a month, right? 7 big events.
Yeah.
The stadium being full for 5 group stage matches, and then a round of 32, a round of 16. So there's it's amazing on the soccer side and the purity side, Victor. The vendors that will benefit, the hotels that will benefit, etc. Now, not everyone can attend. One of the things here is us as locals, Victor, even press credentials are not guaranteed. Does this become now an elitist event like the Super Bowl where you've got $1,000 tickets plus? Is it out of reach of most people? And I have to say that. It may be a dream that it's here in Houston, but some of us it could be any place in the world. I'm not going to get close to that stadium.
Well, there is like a lottery system, right? So I think people can sign up now, and I think whatever tickets are left, or however there is a weird way that the FIFA ticketing for the World Cup works. But I think it almost has like a Willy Wonka, the golden ticket feel to it, right?
Yeah.
But I think even if you get them in the secondary market, to have this once in a lifetime experience here, you don't have to travel anywhere else. Again, just the advantages that comes with it. The tourists from all over the world that will be visiting this city, even just people locally, right? Not just talking about these 3 countries, but just regionally. Corpus Christi, McAllen, San Antonio. I mean, just and Houston itself, Katy, Pearland, Pasadena. I mean, all these, this entire community all around Houston gets to host this event. Some may get to feel some of the trickle down, if we can call it that.
Sure.
Local fields. We'll see how, again, the local teams manage that as well. But I think it's just once in a lifetime. Maybe twice in a lifetime for me, because I was alive for '94, but I was 4 years old. I didn't get to go to any of the games. My parents weren't big soccer fans then, so there wasn't. I'm sure they watched it on TV, but I wasn't. I didn't get to be a part of that one, right? I get to be a part of this one. A lot of people will get to be a part of this one and take their own kids, take their own parents, their own family members, and make it really an unforgettable event.
Well, look, we talked a little bit about the accessibility of the event, and again, there's a finite number of tickets, so only so many people can be there. I get that not every one of us is going to get into the room, into the building, into the stadium. The other part of it is the effect of a World Cup in this country, and co-sharing it with Mexico and Canada. That speaks of already our cooperation at the level of competitions and CONCACAF, obviously. But Victor, do you think this sets up, again, a drive toward whatever's next in our country as far as the sport? We already have the MLS. The MLS seems to be doing well if you look at it objectively. Actually, in a recent poll by the Pew Research Center, Victor, baseball was no longer America's pastime. That was American football. And by the way, soccer surpassing hockey in that list. So do you expect then that the effect of the 2026 World Cup will be positive for the growth of the sport, as we mentioned back in 1994, which really started when we have an MLS today?
It should. Almost even by accident, it should, right? I mean, there's no... I can't imagine a scenario where it isn't, right? And I think... the organizers have to be doing something wrong if it just doesn't. Just by accident, just by having it here. The fan fest around it too. That's going to be another thing. It's just going to be there. I mean, I don't see any way that it doesn't. Last go around, the MLS started because of the '94 World Cup, right? And this should be, in essence, the next push forward. And hopefully it is, and hopefully it just sort of takes off. I think we've already started seeing some of the things you just said, where maybe a little bit more popular than the NHL. It should, right? It's the world's game. Worldwide, more people watch the World Cup than they do the Super Bowl or any other event. But I think what you're speaking of course, is regionally, right? I'll give you one example, right? Just ratings-wise, more people in the United States saw Messi in that beer commercial at the Super Bowl than they did in the FIFA World Cup final in 2022.
That's incredible.
Because the audience is, that's where the U.S. still has to maybe wrestle in getting into the casual viewership. And I think, this World Cup sort of has to do that, right?
Look, I attempted in my questions, in my comments, to find something negative, Victor, but I rarely smile, but there you see it, ladies and gentlemen. This what's coming in 2026 is the culmination of I think, another cycle that began in 1994. I really look at it that way. Yes, is FIFA a corrupt organization? Without a doubt. Is U.S. soccer not the perfect organization? Absolutely. And we can tear it apart, Victor, and that's easy in many ways. But I'm looking at it the other way. What I've seen in my lifetime, in Houston in particular, it's a transformed landscape when it comes to our sport, and that's positive.
No, absolutely. And then the biggest thing is, even just, I don't want to call it a necessary evil, but it's a part of it, right? The business side is a part of it. And I think the biggest, I don't know if mistake, but I feel maybe the biggest question, the thing that we're almost confused, guys like you and me that know the power of the sport, why haven't more people found a way to make more money off of this when it's the most popular sport in the world, and when it's probably maybe the most accessible? All you need is a soccer ball and grass. Not even grass. You play it on concrete, you play it on dirt, and it just hasn't been able to, or not that it hasn't been able to. I just think they just haven't tapped into it in this country. Yeah. And maybe a lot of it is to protect the other sports, but in the end, again, having the World Cup here, you're not going to be able to ignore it.
No, no, absolutely not. So without a doubt, the World Cup is what we are all now looking forward to as organizers in the cities. Victor, quickly before we go on to the start of the MLS season, most teams in preseason, what do you think of the opening match in Azteca and then the closing match in New Jersey? New Jersey, the MetLife, not the most attractive, like Alex Parra, not the most attractive, but it's in a huge market.
I think I was less surprised than most people because I think following this from the bid, from the beginning stages, right? I always thought those were the original parameters that, Mexico was going to get the opening game and the final was going to be in New York, New Jersey. And then, along the way, we got all these rumors, right, about, well, this could happen, that could happen. And then, as of late, this whole Arlington rumor kind of caught on fire. Where,
so you think it was wishful thinking?
No, I'm saying, and I know things change over time, but for me, it's kind of like, well, that was the original plan, and I kind of like it that for what New York is in the United States, right? It's the biggest city. LA got the final last time.
Yeah.
I think in that sense, it works out for the European time zone, all that stuff. I think it works great. New Jersey is also a great soccer market. There's, a lot of the coaches, a lot of the professional players in this country are from that area. Maybe it's fitting. And I think we probably didn't expect it because, again, like you mentioned, corruption with FIFA and you thought maybe there might be something where, the money would win out and Jerry Jones would get it up in Dallas. But I'm fine with it. And, obviously Mexico gets the opening game. There's controversy in Mexico about that, right? If maybe they just kind of, gave up, World Cup of their own, but that's another conversation.
And we'll keep talking about the organization of this and three countries coming together and the powers that be, absolutely, in making this a successful event. We mentioned 1994, now 2026. 1994 was the start, if you will, the chispa, the spark that got the MLS started. And we're about to start another MLS season. Victor, a lot of the teams doing their preseason, and in particular, the Houston Dynamo, a team that basically has said, look, we're going to get started, but we're also going to go to Mexico. If I'm not mistaken, this is now the second year that they visited Mexico in preseason. In this case, without Hector Herrera, so that I think was a factor in some of this. But they visited, and we're looking at video now from Chivas. They had some friendlies there. What are the positives and negatives of these trips in preseason to Mexico, Victor? It's good competition. It's bonding. It's coming together as a team. But it appears to me that for a week or so, or 10 days, there's no local media going down there and covering this, like spring training, where literally the local stations are there for every pitch, which is still amazing to me. Preseason games for baseball, there's already a bunch of them, and nobody that I know is consistently sending us live shots, Victor, from Guadalajara. It just doesn't happen. So is this good and bad at the same time for the Dynamo?
I like it. I think there obviously the pros are what you mentioned, the competition, right? To place teams like Chivas, Atlas, Leones Negros. I think, and even if it's their fuerzas básicas, right? Their lower teams, their B teams, their academies. I think you're getting another culture. You're getting teams that, just by the U.S.-Mexico rivalry, there's going to be more of that, what you mentioned, chispa, just that fiery spirit in those games, in those, even if they're preseason games, as opposed to what you would have against MLS competition when they used to do it out in Arizona or Florida or wherever, right? So I think from the competitive standpoint, there's that. I think, like you said, the team bonding aspect of it, getting away, teammates being together for about a week and a half, a different country. I think that worked well for last year, right? I think especially with Herrera being the host in its home country, we saw videos of him giving everybody gifts, right? Like a luchador mask and all that kind of stuff. I think that set the seeds for what ended up being the 2023 season, where Herrera, I think, still I don't feel gets enough credit, but I think was a big part of the bonding that this team had, the camaraderie on the field, and himself, installing himself as a leader and as a credible voice among his teammates. So I think from that aspect, that's the big one. But the other one, like you said, if you're talking about a team that's not pressing in its city, doesn't have the marketing, you're out of sight, you're out of mind.
And the reality is just that now the team is coming back to Houston. We think they're back. Then there's going to be more preseason games, if I'm not mistaken, in Orlando. And literally the first match is days away. The reality, Victor, and it hurts me because, like you, I love this sport, is that there are more local stations right now down in Kissimmee getting ready for preseason, spring training of Major League Baseball. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying that's a negative. That's our current sports culture in Houston. And it's in some ways it's sad. The lack of coverage that's still there.
Well, it's the reality. It's the reality, honestly. And I think, the counterpoint is Inter Miami, right? They're doing tours all around the world. Media's traveling with them because of who they are and the players that they have. So maybe that's the answer that we have here for the Dynamo, right? If they had a big star that commanded more media attention, maybe that would be it. And obviously, you mentioned Herrera. Yeah. Herrera was there last year, and they got more media attention. I think not locally, just down there in Mexico. Yeah. They had a few interviews down there, but I don't think enough. Obviously because Herrera with his injury wasn't present. But even then, I don't think they made enough of getting out and just taking advantage of being in another World Cup city in Guadalajara.
Sure. Well, Victor, let me share, I guess, with our audience, and these are the moments I think where we're a little different in our presentation, especially in this longer format. The reality of what the Houston Dynamo as an organization did last year, Victor, when they made it to the U.S. Open Cup final down in Fort Lauderdale against Miami, in the expectation of having Messi play, which he didn't, was that they paid. They basically traveled local media down there with the hope of that coverage, okay?
Right.
And my question is, the precedent that sets is very interesting to me. For full disclosure, we traveled there on our own, and this is a sour grapes comment, Victor. It's a decision they made on the charter to fly people, and look, I'm 100% okay with that. It's not about me. Is now the precedent that in order to get attention away from home, they're going to have to travel media because that's the only way there's interest in the Houston Dynamo?
The short answer is yes. The short answer is yes, because the media aren't going to put the cost in or cover the cost of traveling like they will for the Astros or the Rockets or the Texans. It's not going to happen. Yeah. So I think, to answer your question, you want local coverage, you're going to have to offer it up, because that's the thing too. They also have to agree to send their reporters down there for a week, right, or wherever you're going. If you're going to an away game, and there won't be outlets that agree to it for journalistic integrity. For example, newspapers I think are very, like the Houston Chronicle, right? I think very old school in that sense, where like, no, we appreciate, we can't accept it, right, just on principle. Because it almost looks like you're paying for coverage, and that's not what we, so even if, you offer the 5-star hotel, we're not going to take it. So I do think that still exists. Like I said, obviously with the Chronicle, and I'll mention this with them because I think we didn't ask and we covered our costs regardless. But again, I do think to get that attention, that is what they're going to have to do with some of the outlets.
And look, Victor, I go back to it. And I'm not knocking the term you just used, journalistic integrity. All this is show business, Victor. And a very good friend of mine who Enrique Vasquez, and I talk about this. This is entertainment. The stations, the broadcasters are in it for ratings and for money. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think we need to put that conversation behind us. This is all entertainment. This is all marketing. This is all business. So I don't know if the Chronicle, if that's one, and I'm not picking on the Chronicle, is not saying, hey, put me on the charter. Sure, we can save some money. We still do coverage. As long as they're not dictating what it is I'm saying or how I'm saying it, censorship, if you will. I think we're perfectly fine, if you will. These are businesses that coexist and need each other. We need each other in many ways. I go back to my point, though, the reality of spring training and the coverage there, and for the Houston Dynamo Dash, the reality of making the U.S. Open Cup final against the best player potentially in the history of the world, Victor, and still needing to convince people to cover it. That doesn't bode well, in my opinion. And maybe it's because of the sports culture in our town that some people just still consider soccer. I didn't play it. That's a foreigner sport. I'm going to say it. There's a lot of people that still have that mentality, Victor.
They do, but you know, what's the excuse in Atlanta, and what's the excuse out in LA with LAFC and even the Galaxy, right? With Seattle up there.
Yeah.
There are teams in MLS that have found a way to get local coverage. Some of it has been results based. Some of it has been big signings. Miami right now, right? I mean, all the coverage that they're getting worldwide, and obviously Messi's a big part of that. But I think maybe different formula for different cities, but I think it's not impossible. And I think the biggest thing is, the biggest thing we're getting at is the club itself needs to be more proactive than wait on media to just cover them, just based on journalistic integrity. Because again, when it comes to the priority list, they're not high up there.
And look, as we start looking at this season, and we'll discuss in further podcasts how the team can potentially repeat some of the success from last season. They won't be surprising a lot of people anymore. Can Ben Olsen continue this? Will Hector Herrera be back? Will he be healthy? Victor, we were also recently at the Houston Sports Awards. The presence there, for obvious reasons, was because they were away in Mexico. They weren't able to be present, like the Astros a few years ago. That's not where I'm going. But even locally, a lot of people still don't recognize these athletes that are with the Dynamo and the Dash.
Well, again, it doesn't help to not be present at things like that, right? I mean, you got a whole bunch of media corps there to be able to just talk in front of a bunch of different outlets, and you don't have anybody not from the team present. I mean, Tate Schmidt, even, right? Somebody who's still injured, recovering, or just anybody, right? And you mentioned results-based. They got to be careful to think they can repeat, and the fans too, to think they're going to just repeat what they did in 2023. I'd say look at 2017, and then look what happened the years after. I mean, it's not a for sure that Ben Olsen's got all the keys, and he's suddenly found success, right? Because it is going to get difficult here. Hector Herrera, that's a big question mark. Nelson Quiñones got injured in Olympic qualifying, so he's going to be out for a long time. The 9th position is still a question mark, right? With Sebastián Ferreira, yeah, he's been scoring in preseason, but is that situation all fixed? What's going to happen there?
And we'll
on and on we go.
Sure, on and on we go, and we will in this Deportes Nation Soccer podcast. Let me wrap up with this on the Houston Dynamo for now before we switch to the NWSL and the Houston Dash. Victor, is the MLS ready for prime time relative to the coverage, to the scrutiny, to the criticism? I think yes, at a league level. Are the Houston Dynamo ready? Well, you and I are blessed, privileged to be able to attend media events, and the reporting is light, superficial, and positive. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying rarely have I seen an approach to coaches, to management, to players about why they're not winning, as we expect, number one, in other sports in this country, and number two, certainly the way the sport, football, calcio, football, is digested and lived almost everywhere else in the world. Are we ready for this next level of scrutiny, pressure, and questioning of the Houston Dynamo?
Yeah, I think simplest way I can answer is some people are and some people aren't. And I think there's certain players, right? Hector Herrera, Franco Escobar, and Eric Sviatchenko, guys that have been at the big stage or in big leagues. They know how to handle that.
Yeah.
They know here it's obviously way tempered down. But I think as competitors, they like that sort of challenge, right?
They're used to it.
And they relish the attention as well, right? I mean, yeah, that's all part of competitive sports, and we see it in the other leagues here in the United States. Why shouldn't it be in soccer? I don't think some of the coaches maybe, right? Because I think and not just coaches, general managers, front office staff. I think they've all been protected all around MLS. Like you said, a lot of softball questions, even just remotely. Not hard, but just upfront questions just rubs them the wrong way. So I think, but again, having more media present, having that presence, that's the only thing that'll get him used to it. That's the only thing that's going to change, as we've said here in Houston, right? Change the culture around our sport nationally, regionally, however you want to put it. And that's a big thing that the World Cup's going to do as well. So, I mean, if they're not ready, they better be, because there's really no turning back now. World Cup's coming here in 2 years.
Let me wrap this before we talk about the dash on the media side, Victor. I think the lack of education in the sport from the media is also, in their defense, is a reality. A lot of the sportscasters, the entertainers that cover sports in our city have never been exposed to the sport. I think they stay away from it because, frankly, they don't know it. And I get that. It's like me trying to cover, I don't know, lacrosse. It looks great, but I don't know much about it. We all have limitations, right? And I think the sports media culture has to change, Victor. And where I'm going with this, Victor, is a lot of us that are bilingual and bicultural, Victor, grew up with multiple sports because of where we came from. That gives us, as the city changes, a different outlook. The traditional stations, and I'll mention the ESPN radio and people like that, they're unidimensional in what they cover. They're traditionalists. That's ending, Victor. And I think they're threatened by that. And that's one of the pluses that our sport has. Our sport is the present and the future. Some of these other sports are dying out. And sports coverage is going to die out, Victor. At least that's the way I look at it.
Perhaps. I look at it maybe a different way. I think there's only a couple ways to change it. One is obviously you dive into the sport, you learn more about it, sure. Right? If you're a journalist, and you're going to cover something, you soak up as much information, even if you already know enough, right, about
you never know enough, sport. Yeah.
So I think that's one side of it. The other side of it is this is where we don't talk enough about the decision makers, the editors, the directors, the people in charge. If you don't have somebody that's an expert on a certain subject and you need to get one, go out and hire somebody. There's nothing stopping stations from doing that. There's nothing stopping newspapers. There's stopping any outlets from doing that if they want to get serious about the coverage. So I think, there's different ways of looking at it. But I mean, the audience is there. I think we've seen it. The audience is there.
The audience is there. It's growing. It's changing. Again, Victor, I go to and I say this all the time, I go to the dark ages of soccer in the city. I happen to be the assistant coach for a team called the Houston Force. We were called the Houston Farce, by the way. The team only existing a couple of months. And that's a story for another day. But Victor, there was no coverage for soccer. The Chronicle, actually, the Post and the Chronicle came out to one game because there's an article somewhere in an archive about the team, I believe, training over at Azteca Park back in the day. This is a long time ago, Victor. But my point is, you're right. The culture is changing, but I think this needs to be sped along, Victor. We're in 2024. It's time for some of these dinosaurs to die out and our sport to be better accepted and better covered. And man, if we don't, and this doesn't change soon, I ask myself why.
I'll put it this way: there's a lot of businesses in Houston that have bilingual staff, right? A big reason is because if you don't have your business isn't serving people who speak Spanish, you're losing a big customer base. And I think it's the same way here. If you're not going at soccer, well, maybe they don't see the customer base, but the customer base is there. And if you want to go after it, I mean, that's again, that's up to you.
Absolutely. So we will continue also the media watch. Who's covering it? Why are they covering it? You know what? My props lately to Fox 26. By the way, I'm an alum of Fox 26 many, many years ago working there in news. It's always about me, Victor, and you, ladies and gentlemen, you know that. I always throw something in there about me. But, the station has done a good job in covering the sport lately. And I'm happy and proud of that. I think they're also seeing the market that's involved in that coverage. They're not doing it necessarily out of the kindness of their hearts. Again, this is all business and entertainment. Victor?
Big Fox has the World Cup rights, so it's almost, I mean, you have to. And, to be fair, they've covered it probably better than most of the local English stations.
Absolutely.
For a little while now. And I also give love to the local Spanish stations in Telemundo and Univision, because they've been there at it too as well. So, but, again, I think I go back to it. When they do something important, when the Dynamo Dash do something important, it pops up. So, and it's not all on the outlets either. I know fans like to, say, why aren't you covering the teams enough, right? But I also think, part of it is on the teams as well.
Yeah.
It's a two-way street.
It is. So they're talking a little bit about the MLS and the Houston Dynamo as they get ready to start their season. But why don't we switch gears a little bit and talk about the other local professional team, the Houston NWSL, another team that for a week or so also decided, you know what, I'm not sticking around here, and they headed to Tucson.
Even more out of sight, out of mind. Yeah, I always. It's a little rough. I mean, because I know we all sort of have a soft spot for women's sports. We want it to succeed, and maybe we take it a little easier than we do with the men's. I think it's just kind of, it is fact, because again, for as much as we talk about Dynamo not getting coverage in this town, the Dash get even less. And I agree with you here in this sense. I mean, what was the point of going out to Tucson? I don't see what they did there that they couldn't do, not even just locally, but even if you wanted to get out of town, go to a resort type of deal, right? Why not go up the road at Austin, right? I mean, you're the only, well, we'll get to that. Not no more, but they used to be the only professional women's team in the state of Texas. And again, I know there's problems locally with coverage and getting people out to the stadium, but again, I don't ever see why the lack of vision to grow the game locally isn't there. And with Austin not having an NWSL team or a USL Super League team, I just don't see that side of it. And again, at least when the Dynamo did it, there was all the MLS teams congregated there. It was sort of like MLB spring training. In this case, I'm a little lost. I'm scratching my head on this one.
Look, the NWSL, and we're going to talk about this topic here toward the end of this segment, is still working on getting its legs beneath it as a league to continue filling stadiums consistently. Signings this offseason, including Maria Sanchez, and the millions that have been spent on player salaries is certainly a positive thing, Victor. I know, and I've heard the horror stories of professional players, not only women recently, but men back in the day who, they would have a signing of a serious player, but most rostered players, they had to have a second job to pay the rent, to feed themselves and their families. So that is improving, which tells me investors, new owners, are coming in and realizing and putting their money where their mouth is, which is good. I appreciate that. Now, let's go back to the coverage, the lack of coverage, Victor. Is it sexism? Is it still from a place of ignorance? Is it from a place of, well, I don't know that, so why should I go there? And maybe I'll throw all of that at you and say, how can Shell Energy now go from more than 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 core fans that fill the lower bowl to fill the entire stadium, or at least get into the 7,000 to 10,000 attendance range. Is that a reality, Victor, in the next couple of
Yes,
years?
yes, hell yes, it is. I think we've been conditioned to think that it can't be that way, right? Especially, I go out to Dash games, and I won't mention who I spoke to, but but it's one of these things where it's, I went to a game and it was one of the better attended games, like 5,000 people, and I got told, like that's it, like come on, man, and that's sorry, right? Like that's not good enough. I mean, you're in Houston, Texas. You got all these soccer fans, and I was like, you know what, you're right. I've been so conditioned to seeing 2,000, 1,500 or whatever are out there, that 5,000 seems good enough. Why shouldn't we aim for the whole stadium? Why can't that entire stadium be full?
Yeah.
Why, and that's why I'm glad. I mean, I know we'll get to it, but Fran Alonso, the new coach, coming out and kind of putting that out there, setting a high bar. I mean, that is what it should be, and I wish more of the club, the owner, would take that same kind of stance, um, and don't be afraid to fail, right? I think that's the biggest thing. Maybe that's why they're lack of marketing. I don't know, but I mean, I just think, I know there's different things, right? I mean, one of them is, like we mentioned, they got to do their own part to put themselves out there, to get the coverage, because maybe some of it is there's only so much space on the dinner table, right? And there's the Dasher or just don't fit in there with all the other plates, right? The Texans, the Rockets, the Dynamo are struggling as it is. But I think, I'd go back to your question. I mean, why shouldn't it be full? I mean, San Diego does it, LA does it, Portland does it in the NWSL. Why shouldn't, in Houston, Texas, in a World Cup city, we aspire to have that stadium full?
Victor, so let me give you my thoughts on why and what needs to happen as a suggestion, not necessarily as the only response or answer. The team has continued, they've been consistent about not reaching that threshold of more than consistently 5,000 fans, except for that one playoff match, which we were at, which was amazing. Yeah. And I really miss.
But it wasn't a sellout.
No, it was not a sellout.
I mean, if you want to nitpick.
You're right. It was not a sellout. Well, the Dynamo games are not sellouts. Even
last year, no.
Even
no,
with
the entire year, no.
Yes, even with winning. Even with winning. So let me go back to a couple of observations that I think contribute to the lack of attendance. The mistake the Dynamo have now owned, the Dynamo Dash professional organization, is the arrangement they previously had with Dynamo Dash Youth Club, which was not their academy. It was an independent club that basically was marketing the name, wearing the jerseys, and providing, in their words, the pathway to professionalism. They've disavowed that 100%. But the legacy of 6-7 years of that, Victor, is still deep-rooted in youth clubs in the city who should be, in many ways, supporting both of these clubs. So I think that's one piece.
Years now, damn near their whole history, because I think the academy system started around 2007. So I think, and we're just talking about the youth sector there. We're not talking about the casual fans. We're not talking about the authentic soccer fan. And that's what they're wrestling against.
Well, they're wrestling against also a lack of trust, Victor. When you use the word poaching players, when we talk about local clubs having direct competition because of the name and the logo and the jersey, there is no trust.
Right.
That's my understanding. Number one, there's no trust. But in any relationship, that takes time to rebuild, Victor. And that's, I think, one of the realities that both clubs, the Dash and the Dynamo, have to look at. How are we going to get the thousands, hundreds of thousands of soccer-playing families back, or getting them to our stadium, if we haven't built that trust? That's not going to happen overnight. That may not even happen with winning another trophy. And that's a very unique situation for the city, Victor, because I'm going to say this, the organization alienated many people in the past. That's just the truth. Now, how do you start working on that? So that's a big piece of it, Victor. How can they fill the stadium? The other part of it, Victor, is the competition. You now have a Houston Texans team, which you and Enrique Vasquez cover very well, that's on the rise. A Houston Astros team that continues to win and continues to appeal to the hearts of the community. The Rockets are up and coming. The landscape, it's still very, very difficult to navigate. Sports in general, we spoke about this a few minutes ago. World Cup tickets, Super Bowl tickets, costs are only going to go up. Families at some point have to make choices. So that's all part of the competition in this city. So I think, number one, they have to work on the youth piece and building the bridge and trust with the youth. Second, continue hammering away when it comes to marketing. And even being, Victor, from my perspective, being a little selfish about, you know what? We can't compete at a high level. We are comparing ourselves to these teams. Is it true? Is it not true? We will have to see. What have we worked on, Victor? Some of the game broadcast in English and Spanish, there needs to be more of that. There's still a lot of people that don't know the quality of product that exists at Shell Energy Stadium, and that's a shame.
It is, but I think maybe it's, again, you got to see the positive and see the opportunity. It is good that, the other teams are doing well. I think if you take it as a mentality, right, I'll take one from the Texans, a T-shirt D'Amico Ryan's likes to wear, iron sharpens iron, right? This is the moment now that you can, why not, maybe not aim to beat them, right? Because I think, you got to keep it realistic. But anything those other teams are doing, you got to be doing at least. You got to at least attempt to do a fraction of that.
Yeah.
Match some of that. Match some of the efforts they make in the community, the efforts they make for media coverage. If the Texans are being available, there's no reason for the Dynamo and Dash not to be available in the same extent, right? And I think, those are the little things. Regaining trust is a big part of it, but how do you do it? You just one foot in front of the other and keep building those steps.
Victor, quickly, do you think the Apple TV deal has hurt the league, has hurt the Dynamo in particular, because people that don't have access just aren't catching the games?
I don't, because they probably weren't catching the games before, maybe. I mean, I think, again, there's pros and cons to everything, right? I don't think it's a big con or big disadvantage to be associated with one of the best technology companies in the world, in Apple, right? And to have that reach. I think, again, missed opportunity. You have content on there that maybe isn't updated as regularly as it should, or the content that you have maybe isn't striking, the right nerves in certain people, right? I don't know if you're making enough fans, if you're taking enough advantage of having that platform, right? And I don't think that stops them from doing local programming. The Dynamo and Dash can rent airtime on local stations and do a review show like Austin does, like I think Cincinnati does. Again, it's the effort. If they want the coverage, or if they want to be out there and display themselves, they can. There's nothing stopping them. They don't have hands tied behind their back. And I think, again, that's why I always point to effort when I talk about, you don't have to match Texans dollar for dollar. You don't have to match the Astros dollar for dollar in marketing efforts. But you can match them in hustle. Isn't that what we're talking about? Hustling for more. That's the theme this season. Let's hope so. If they do it, they can earn some people back, and they can put some butts in the seats for sure.
Talking a little bit here on the Deportes Nation Soccer Podcast, Alex Parra, Victor Araiza. Thanks to all of you that follow us and listen to us and tolerate us. We were talking about the NWSL and the Houston Dash, and just today, Victor, we had the opportunity to attend an event at Shell Energy Stadium, which was the final official welcome of Fran Alonso as the new head coach of the team. It took a little while, but he's here.
He's here again. Maybe he could have been presented last week with if they've been here locally, whatever. I mean, guys in town did the press conference. I think there's a lot of good things that came out of it. Again, we can, if we want to get serious about where the Dash are, we can nitpick at some stuff. But I think, the biggest thing, inspiring story, what he said. Started out, going on a dream to England. I think he said, he was a cleaner at a facility, and then he, became a translator because he was and then he became an assistant coach. And I mean, so this is the guy that relishes in challenges. Certainly has a good story. We'll see now what he does with resources. He certainly put the time in. And again, I applaud him for not being afraid of going out there and setting the bar high and saying, I want this place full.
Yeah.
I want to raise the level of the women's game, and I hope that he does. I think he's going to have a lot of enthusiasm for the first year, and I hope it doesn't get killed. I hope it doesn't die down, because that corporate environment that still exists, it does. I think, again, hopefully it doesn't hamper some of those ambitions, and hopefully they are able to get out in the community, like you said. I'll mention one real quick. From what I heard, and I'll keep it at sources. Not much different from the aspirations that Juan Carlos Amoros had when he was the coach here. He wanted to aim high, and for one reason or another, didn't see eye to eye. That's why I mentioned I hope they're all in on Fran Alonso, and I hope they're able to back him, and I hope it works.
The word mentioned in the presentation, Victor, was energy, and certainly he brings the energy. He is charismatic in the sense of being multilingual, multicultural, something that we can identify with a lot in this city. The players themselves seem to be enthusiastic, even though they started preseason without him physically being here because of visa issues. That's now behind him. So I sense the energy, and also the approach to the game is going to be aggressive. They're trying to do being a high-scoring team. I wish him and them well in the sense of this is a good time for this team to take off. We're going to talk about shortly about the USL Super League, apparently trying to bring in some competition, but women's sports is being recognized in so many ways. Victor, this team has stories to be told. Not only Maria Sanchez, not only Ordóñez. There's a player, a local player, Barbara Olivieri, who played locally in the Katy area. She went to Texas A&M. Now she's playing with her hometown team, if you will. Those stories need to be told. To me, they can inspire so many boys and girls locally to say, I can do this, I can be a part of this. That's part of the job, I think, of any organization, to tell those stories. Coach Fran's story is amazing, is inspiring, and those things have to be told. And I'm going to say this, not in a flippant way, but if they have to, Victor, do that and pay for that coverage, they need to do it, because those stories just need to be told. Does that make sense?
No, I agree. They have to put it out there as much as they can. Again, they don't control what people air or what they print, but they can suggest it, right? They can ask. You don't lose anything by asking. That's part of it. The other part of it is these players, these coaches, the front office, they all have to be accessible as well. I know I find it a bit sad, I think, because I believe we asked, or somebody asked on the first day of preseason, what else do they got to do to, unless I'm mistaken, I think, the answer of some of the players were, well, I think we're doing as much as we can, right? And I disagree with that. I don't think they are. And I think, and maybe it's a side effect of the women's game where you got to work harder to get, to get some of that attention. I'm not saying completely do it for free, right? I think players can get endorsements. There's ways to do it. But I do think that, whatever, call it selfish, call it for your own brand. But I think players need to get out there more. Players need to sometimes take the handle on their stories as well, because sometimes, in spite of the club not doing it, again, Fran Alonso says he wants to be community-based. I hope that it doesn't just stop there. I hope put him out there as much as possible. I wish some of these players were out there as much as possible. Schools, there could be local trainings. I mean, be open to that kind of stuff. I know there's things, maybe the NWSL Player Association, with some of these things, but again, I think you just can't keep it in the confines of that stadium and just, post-game player autographs and think that's enough getting into the community.
Look, I agree with you, and I know I don't know personally, but I imagine that beyond you being a full-time athlete, it's a burden to be around people and sign autographs and make appearances. But I think that's part of your job description. You and I talked about this, Victor. Media, how to deal with the media, how to answer media. Training is important. Telling your story, not being short in your answers, having a thought about what you're going to be saying is important. But I think that's part of the growing process of any entity, Victor. It's growing, it's getting better. And I'll let you have the last word on this.
Look, well, we hear about the investment as well, right? I mean, if you have to pay the athletes a little extra, right, to make appearances, figure out how you're going to do it. But I think, it has to come from the organization, the players, both hand in hand, getting out as much as possible. One event a year for season ticket holders isn't enough.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be a constant campaign, a constant effort. And that's how you're going to get little by little people to the stadium.
Yeah. We're talking about the NWSL, the Houston Dash in particular, here on the Deportes Nation Soccer Podcast. Alex Parra, Victor Araiza. And Victor, in the last couple of days, there was news that U.S. Soccer, they made news a lot in the last get-together, in the last gathering, but the sanctioning of the USL Super League as a Div 1 women's league, which is the same exact sanctioning, as I understand it, as the NWSL. My question is this. We just talked about the uphill battle that this league has in order to fill stadiums, in order to have more television and media coverage. Why would U.S. Soccer suddenly say, you know what, they need competition? Because basically that's what it is. It's not going to be in the same markets necessarily to start with. There's been a list of cities in this inaugural 2024 season, but we need to dig deeper into this, Victor. How, from my perspective, with limited information that I have, is your product of Div 1 is only starting. It's finally trying to gather some traction, and now you're going to have competition for the same potential market? I don't see it at this point in time unless greater minds than mine have a bigger plan, maybe a merger and a growth.
Well, I think in the fine print, says that as long as they have, a certain percentage of teams in major markets, they can apply for Division 1 status, and that's certainly what's happened here. So, again, I'm not going to pretend to know all the details, but I think just on the surface, I think competition is good. This is a different situation in the United States where you don't have promotion relegation. So, it's not like you can just say, hey, well, I mean, here's Division 1, there's 20 teams, and, you want to get in there, you do pro rel.
Right.
So why shouldn't there be multiple Division 1s? I may not, I don't agree with it, but I mean, there's that. I think maybe the schedules are going to be different. The biggest thing I say, competition's good, and it's good as well for the NWSL because, I mean, they do need somebody to light a fire under them to maybe, get going in some markets, Houston, like we've mentioned.
Look, competition is good, Victor. I agree with that. But at some point, you have to be realistic. As U.S. Soccer, again, the entity under FIFA, the most corrupt organization in the world, I keep going back to that. The motivation behind doing some of these things. If you're trying to grow the sport, but you know what? This happens at the youth level, Victor, to be honest with you. ECNL and the GA, for instance, these are competing businesses that U.S. Soccer has said, you know what? Go for it, go conquer. And by the way, what's my take? By the way, how much are you sending back to me? That's their priority, and it's okay. This is all a business, Victor.
And not that I think it'll happen in the men's game, but does this set a precedent for MLS and a separate Division 1? Maybe after the World Cup. I mean, I don't know if it's opening a can of worms, but hey, if the rules say it can happen, then all power to the USL. And look, what if they put a better product on the field? What if they get more fans out to games? That's only good for the sport.
It is. It is. Look, strictly speaking, what you said is correct. Competition is good. But be careful, Victor, because what happens next? Maybe NFL owners now get behind this other league and they're paying in their stadiums. And now one day there's direct competition here in Houston or in Texas for those markets. This is a business. That's what drives all of this. Speaking of competitions, Victor, as we jump to something else and we start wrapping up this latest edition of our Deportes Nation Soccer Podcast. Copa America is coming. Talk about business, talk about what that means and the potential that tournament has, again, to start and continue that spark going. And certainly with matches in our city as well, in the state of Texas, it's very, very accessible to us.
It is, and I think it's in a way a mini World Cup, right? To a lesser extent, to a fraction of what the World Cup's going to be. We are going to see some high-profile games with the South American nations coming here. Again, the more the merrier, and I think certainly for our local teams, right? The United States, Mexico, Canada, to have this sort of competition helps them as well in a competitive tournament as opposed to maybe what the Gold Cup is. I mean, that's just, again, the reality of it. So it's great.
And as early as February in Houston, we also have the CONCACAF Women's Gold Cup.
The W Gold Cup, yeah.
There you go.
About time, right? Or maybe we can get the Women's Champions Cup going up here soon. And that's another thing to think about with this, the USL, NWSL thing. Is would there be a Super Cup for those leagues? But yeah, why not have this regionally? I don't know. I think, again, all these things it's been overdue, right? And maybe a lot of it is because of the investment or the lack of the investment.
Yeah.
So it's good to see that finally get rolling.
And Victor, as complicated and as negative that I may sound in some of these topics, we're living a golden age of soccer, to be honest with you. Never did I dream in our city of Houston, Copa America. Never did I dream that we'd have a stadium dedicated, a soccer-specific stadium. Never did I think in Houston we'd have a World Cup coming to our city. So I smile because regardless of the details of the issues, this certainly, in my lifetime, is the best soccer, has certainly the best position that soccer has been in my lifetime. Victor, as we wrap up, any thoughts about what you're looking forward to here in the next week of coverage? I know that literally we're right around the corner of the start of another MLS season.
Yeah, CONCACAF Champions Cup has started. We've seen an upset, right, with Real Estelí locally to America. I know maybe the Dynamo don't get to travel as much as some fans would like. That should theoretically help them, though, right, in their hopes to maybe advancing. But it's going to be tough. But we'll be watching that. Of course, we'll be watching the run-up to the NWSL. Again, a lot of soccer to go. Locally, there's some high school games. I know, again, you work on the youth side. There's a lot of games there every weekend. So, again, the biggest takeaway I take is we got 2 years up to the World Cup, and I really hope the local teams take advantage of that and build on it as much as they can, rather than just kind of waiting for 2026 to arrive.
No, I feel there's a fire that's been lit, Victor, with the naming of the venues, specifically how many games each venue will receive, and I really feel in Houston for sure, the support will be there, and that means the sponsors, that means the attention that will be drawn to this unique and amazing event that's coming. Victor, we have to say adios, goodbye, hasta luego for now. But Victor, thank you like always. It's great to be beside you as the co-host of this Deportes Nation Soccer Podcast. So ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Victor, I'm Alex. Until next time, when we come together, talk a little bit about soccer, football, calcio, whatever you prefer here on Deportes Nation.